Welcome to Sabbath Vespers. I'm Nerida Taylor Bates, the president of the Association of Adventist Women. Isn't this a lovely setting? This is how my community has worked to bring people together. We have the children's play set in the swimming pool in the background, the field where families play soccer together, and students set up a volleyball net. And we have the gazebo, where the toddler and moms group have a drum circle because of the great acoustics. It got me to thinking, how do we build community in church? It also got me to thinking about how do we build community outside of church? Now, I'm not saying that this is a perfect community. I've seen racism, I've seen bullying, and I'm not just talking about my neighborhood, I'm talking about my church. If we're to be the body of Christ, we have to get along in a way that's equal and respected and shows love for everyone. Today, we're going to be hearing about these topics from Lori Barker. Dr. Lori Barker went to Yale and then got her PhD in psychology at UCLA. She's now a teacher at Cal Poly Pomona. Our panel today is led by Dr. Yami Bazan. She's an up-and-comer. She's the Vice President for Student Life at La Sierra University. And she went to La Sierra and got her PhD in Educational Leadership at Andrews University. Let's bow our heads and ask God to help our community. Father, our communities need so much healing. We need healing in so many areas, in health, in race, in politics. Please help us to look around us and see everyone as brothers and sisters in the world of God. Amen.
Many moons ago, my grandfather had a story he would try to tell me. He often used stories to give you indirect advice. And so in this case, he told me a story about coals in the fire. So he painted this picture of a living room fireplace that was lit with the coals all crowded together, warming each other, and so warming the room. And as he told me this story, I could almost feel the heat on my hands and my face. And then he described somebody taking the poker stick and pushing a few of the coals away from the bundle, away from the center of the fire. What would happen to those coals, he asked me. Of course, I said they would cool and they would lose heat. That's right, he said. Eventually, the more the coals were separated, the more they would lose heat and the quicker the fire would go out. The moral he was getting at was rooted in a traditional understanding of the verses at the end of Hebrews. Not forsaking our own assembling together is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near. This is Hebrews 10:25, and I like the preceding verse, which is verse 24, because for me it clarifies what the message is all about. Let us consider how to spur one another on to love and good deeds. And then it says, let us not neglect meeting together, as some have made a habit, but let us encourage one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. The way that I was raised was that these verses were strictly applied to church attendance, especially Sabbath services. But I think every one of us who's navigated the coronavirus pandemic this year and all the other upheavals that have happened this year, we've been through a masterclass in thinking more thoughtfully about how coals can be separate, but still keep their heat. So I work at Auburn, which is a multi-faith leadership development center in New York. We equip leaders of faith and moral courage who are engaging in justice work. We intervene strategically in social movements and communities, and we work for social impact through research and narrative change work and mass campaigns. Early on in the pandemic, around March, April, the Auburn team designed a sign-on values campaign for people of faith and moral courage, who are religious people, spiritual people, people of no religious affiliation at all, but who have deeply rooted humane values. And we called it faithful distance. At that time, there were several Christian congregations who were in the media for flouting public health laws and guidelines, and they seemed to be really in denial about the nature and the severity of the pandemic. So we were looking for a low friction, really easy way for principled people to signal that they were committed to practicing their values in ways that didn't harm other people or put people at risk. So we asked them not to hold religious services in person until it was safe to do so. And we also asked them not to abandon community. Because you might remember that the most common phrase for staying at distance 6 feet and apart was social distancing. Internally, what we decided was instead of saying social distancing, we would call it physical distancing, because we recognize that you can't really have thriving communities without a deep and sustained social solidarity. We need each other to flourish. And when so many of our political stories are about people being in silos of experience or understanding, not having deep relationships across difference, there's something really valuable about a contrasting picture that you get from congregational life. And I think that that's what congregations and interest groups like Adventist Today, which I'm on the board of, and the Association of Adventist Women have to offer, that kind of connection across difference, social solidarity. At its root, what I assume is that people have certain core needs that they draw from and that pull them back into community during times of stress and anxiety, and to relieve stress and anxiety. The offerings that we develop as congregational leaders or community leaders for them are more likely to succeed when we take these things into account. So among the things I think people are looking for is space for ritual, regular practice and service, space for peer connection and learning with others, space where they are reminded that they belong to a larger story, a story outside of their individual experience, and where they get a window into a world beyond their four walls. Some early examples of digital communities that sprung up immediately after things began to close down in the outside world was a now 7,000 member Facebook group, a private group for clergy and other community leaders who wanted to find some spiritual and communal responses to COVID. And so this was a Facebook group that sprung up to provide frontline clergy with a space to ask questions about how to do digital worship, how to live stream for the first time, how to adapt to the changing rules about how many people could gather in their sanctuaries, ways to connect congregations between services. And eventually, because this was a multi-faith group, it ended up building understanding across faith groups and traditions. So it wasn't the goal that that would happen, but it often happens when you're in those spaces, sharing the resources of knowledge and experience that you have with others and building trust and consistency that way. A second group was really similar. It's called Pandemic Pedagogy. And that's now 31,000 members. And that's a global group on Facebook where people who started out crying, help, I need to translate my syllabus into a digital platform in 2 weeks because we're shutting down the campus. And it's pivoted from just that sort of tactical resourcing to social engagement through sharing petitions and calling the community of teachers and educators to action. I think it mirrors a pivot that's happened in the summer this year across the US, certainly, for communities moving from just mimicking what has been done in person online and beginning to scan the land, almost like a crow surveying the territory and thinking about the new needs and places where they might intervene. So I've seen overall a gamut of responses to this moment. Like some congregations have mapped their 11 o'clock hour morning service on Sabbath into the live stream format. So they're using the same structure, the same length, the same elements, but a different channel or medium. And the congregations that have done this the best, I think, are congregations who had that infrastructure in place before. So congregations that might have live streamed before, it's easy for them to continue doing so because they had the production process in place, the lights in the sanctuary building or the audio, the camera, streaming capacity and internet, the ability to promote it over social media, a skeleton service team that was willing to come in and record in an empty sanctuary, for example. An advantage of doing it this way is familiarity. It's consistency, and it provides people with an anchor. But a disadvantage is that the mode of doing church doesn't evolve with the people who are living in a new world now. The world that we're in is not the world we began the pandemic in March. And I question whether the old ways of doing church, the rituals that we're used to, will survive the pandemic if it lasts more than a year. Church will survive, but old church might not. And so I'm seeing some congregations beginning to translate some of the usual elements into new contexts. Perhaps they're separating out the ritual elements or conducting some in open air. Communion is one of those elements of ritual practice in congregations that's gotten the most innovative thinking. How about drive-through communion? How do you feel about that one? In much of our culture in Adventism, communion is something that happens only 4 times a year. But in other parts of the Christian community, it's a weekly part of communal life. And so it's something that people deeply do miss if they can't be in physical presence with each other. What happens if the ritual that we use to practice and confirm our oneness and our connection to the true vine isn't something we can do? How does our view of that ritual change, and how does our sense of our connection change? So some communities have responded by democratizing the elements, by changing the elements that are part of the ritual. And some, as I mentioned, have instituted a drive-through process. So you roll up in your car, you get the elements from the pastor, and you roll through. What has your community done? And what does that change tell you about how the community thinks about the ritual? One of the most challenging transitions of this time in the ritual space for me was the Seder, the Passover Seder. Some Jewish friends of mine invited me and have invited me for a couple of years now. It's usually a 3 to 4 hour ritual in somebody's house. You're on the couch, or at the dining table, you're telling stories pretty much all night. It's hard to translate that to a Zoom call. But in this case, it meant that that intimate practice in somebody's house was available across several time zones, literally from the US to Israel. And so families and extended family members could join in this ritual together and create a new family story. How about, instead of communion and rituals, what about some socials? Instead of doing the meet and greet, shaking hands after service, what if we had a weekly call to check in with each other and the ministerial team every week? We could use Zoom for that, or any other conference call mechanism. Community check-ins were really important early on in the pandemic, as some people lost their jobs, some people were furloughed. People were losing some of their most regular social resources, the office water cooler, or easy access to public transportation, or hobnobbing in the grocery store. They were also distanced from their physical neighbors. So if congregations in that moment are also closed, and that's where people have social space, how can we be creative about how to keep in touch without pushing that all on the pastoral team? Leaning into the spirit of peer priesthood, peer connection. So that could, as I say, be a phone conference call, a Zoom meeting, a circle of letter writers for those who are rediscovering snail mail in this slow time. These have all been means for communities to reinforce the social connections and social ties when there are so many competing demands, and it's still not safe to be in people's faces. The third category that I love, and probably my favorite, is the studies and conferences. There is an innumerable number of options available for learning with others in this moment, from public meetings and panels and webinars to live painting tutorials and conversations with book authors and presentations by historians and other scholars. Like, there's a strong appetite for that shared learning, and we have the technology to make it accessible to more people. And as people who organize these sorts of things, we also have the ability to budget to support the speakers who give that knowledge, because every work deserves its hire. And that's a consideration that we can have, because we're not now paying for travel or for accommodations. Adventist today has hosted Sabbath seminars each month over the summer. This is one of those examples of study spaces or learning spaces where you get to hear from a speaker and a specialist and ask them questions for an extended period of time, much more spacious time than perhaps you'd have in a Sabbath school in a building. when you then have to meet from like 10:30 to 11:05, and you have to be out of that space. If the Sabbath seminars are a space where you can actually relax into conversation, which I think is one of the ideals of Sabbath time. It is supposed to be a spacious period. So those are some of the options that I'm seeing people kind of adopt and adapt through the support of technology, but also with the creative thinking. Ultimately, we have that responsibility to faithfully distance, to cancel in-person gatherings until COVID is no longer a deep threat to our community, or there are measures that help to mitigate its impact on us. We thought we might be close to a vaccine, or at least we're closer than we were 8 months ago, but it's still one of the simplest expressions of care that we can express to stay physically distant for the time being. We have an ethic and a duty of care to all the people that we're in community with, both in the context of church life and in our neighborhoods and buildings and out in the streets. And we must not, as far as we can, put others at risk. I also think that we should pair that energy and ethic with an inventive spirit, because we're made in the image of the one who spake and it was done, and we are because God imagined us. So we can be inventive and creative about finding new ways for congregations and communities and movement or justice hubs to gather, to nurture one another, and to provide services to the wider community, writing new stories together in this time.
Hello and welcome. First of all, I'd like to thank Dr. Nerida Bates and the Association of Adventist Women for inviting me to give this talk and to share with you a little bit. The topic that Dr. Bates gave me is creating a sense of community in challenging times. Creating a sense of community in challenging times. I think most of us would agree that 2020 has been a challenging time. So many things going on, and you see all the memes on the internet about, 2020 and what else could go wrong. But let's see if we can identify some of the main things that have been challenging us in this past year. The first one, of course, is the pandemic. It's a global pandemic affecting people all over the world. Millions of people have already died worldwide. And here within the United States, we're at about 250,000 people who have passed away from the virus, and the numbers continue to go up. So the pandemic is something that has dramatically changed life for all of us. Another challenging issue that's really come to the forefront during 2020 is the issue of social unrest, in particular around the issue of racial justice and racism, systemic racism, the Black Lives Matter movement. In the wake of the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and others, people around the world took to the streets to protest the issue of racism and to fight for racial justice. So this is another issue that's really come to the forefront in 2020 that's impacting all of us. The third issue is the election. The past year, we've been inundated with the campaigns, and then the election took place not long ago. And at the time I'm making this video, they're still counting votes, and some people are still disputing what the outcome of that election actually is. But we know when we talk politics, that brings up huge differences of opinion between us, right? We're from different political parties, we support different candidates, we get passionate about different issues. So this is another area that's very challenging for us. And this is for us, a country as a whole here in the United States, but also within the church. The Adventist church is not immune from these issues. We are being impacted by the pandemic. We are being impacted by racism, right? Racism is alive and well within the church, within our church communities, our institutions. It's something that we have to face as well. And as Adventists, we don't all agree on the political issues. We don't all vote for the same candidates. And that is another thing that can create a divide between us. Now, these things are challenging, as I said, to the world as a whole, but also to us as an Adventist church. But there's a fourth space on my slide here for another issue. And this is one that is specific to the Adventist church. This is something that, because of all the other things going on in 2020, has kind of gone on the back burner, but those hot coals are still there just beneath the surface, and they could reignite at any time. What issue is it that I'm talking about? That issue is women's ordination. This is a controversial topic that threatens to tear apart the very fabric of our church. I personally know people who have already left the Seventh-day Adventist Church specifically because of this issue of women's ordination. I have a college-age daughter, and she's very disillusioned about the church. And in part, it's because of this issue of women's ordination. It's also because of the racism that she herself has experienced in our Adventist institutions. It's also because of the great political divide and how people in the church have very strong and differing opinions about politics. So our church people are being impacted. And as I said, the very fabric of our church is being challenged. So these are four of the big things that are happening right now in 2020 that threaten our sense of community. And what do we mean by community? I'm a psychologist. From a psychological point of view, we have three different conceptualizations or three different ways of defining community. The first one is as a particular geographic area. So this has to do with location, right? So it might be your neighborhood, your town, your city, your country, but it's the physical location that defines community. So that's one way of thinking of it. A second way of thinking of community is that it's a network of social relationships and resources. So these are the people that you have relationships with. This is your social network, and it has to do with the resources available to you because of your connections with those people. So it could be material resources, but it could also be social as well as personal resources. The fastest example I can probably give you of this second one is the church. So if any of you belong to a specific church community, then that fits within this second definition, that it's a network of social relationships and resources. Then the third type of community is a psychological sense of community. And this has to do with how we feel bonded or we feel connected to people. And these might be people that we don't even know. So again, in the Adventist church, we could go pretty much anywhere in the world and walk into an Adventist church and feel that sense of community, feel that sense of belonging. It feels familiar, right? There's that connection. Even though we might walk in and not know anyone, we still feel that connection. So these are three different ways to think about community. And in my discussion today, I'm really going to be talking more about the second two. So more about community as a network of social relationships and resources and that psychological sense of community. So here's the question that we're tackling. How do we build community in these challenging times? How do we build community in these challenging times? And I want to argue that this concept of ubuntu, that this concept could be the answer to that question for how we build community in these challenging times. So let's look at the definition here. Ubuntu is defined as I am what I am because of who we all are. And this is a word from the Ngozi languages of Southern Africa. More specifically, it's a term that's used in the countries of South Africa, Swaziland, and Zimbabwe. And so we see the rest of the definition here on this slide. It encompasses compassion, kindness, and humanity that connect us together by sharing ourselves with others and caring for those around us. Now, a lot of people say it's difficult to come with an exact English translation of this word because it encompasses so many different ideas, but this is kind of the closest approximation in English. Now, this term Ubuntu was popularized a lot in South Africa, especially during the anti-apartheid movement and in that time after the fall of apartheid, when they were trying to rebuild and heal the country. So Ubuntu was used as a catch-all phrase for the country's moral ideals, spirit of togetherness, ability to work together towards a common goal, or to refer to examples of collective humanity. So it refers to the connectedness that exists or should exist between all of us. It means behaving well toward others and acting in ways that benefit the community. It's a reminder that no one is an island, that every single thing that we do, good or bad, it impacts our family, our friends, our communities, our country. And it says that we need to think twice when we make decisions because the choices that we make have an impact on everyone around us. That's the idea of ubuntu. This idea is also very closely associated with the humanist philosophies of Nelson Mandela and Archbishop Desmond Tutu. Here's a quote from Nelson Mandela. He says, "In Africa, there is a concept known as ubuntu. It's the profound sense that we are human only through the humanity of others, and that if we are to accomplish anything in this world, it will in equal measure be due to the work and achievement of others." Here's a quote from Barack Obama when he was speaking at the annual Nelson Mandela Conference in Johannesburg in 2018. And when he was speaking about Nelson Mandela, Obama said, "There's a word in South Africa, ubuntu, that describes his, meaning Mandela's, greatest gift, his recognition that we are all bound together in ways that can be invisible to the eye, that there's a oneness to humanity that we achieve ourselves by sharing ourselves with others and caring for those around us." And here's a quote from Archbishop Desmond Tutu. "Ubuntu is very difficult to render into a Western language. It speaks of the very essence of being human. You are generous, you are hospitable, you are friendly and caring and compassionate. You share what you have. It is to say, my humanity is inextricably bound up in yours. We belong in a bundle of life." In the post-apartheid era in South Africa, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was formed. This commission was formed to deal with some of the crimes that occurred during that time, during apartheid. And Archbishop Tutu was appointed as the chair of this commission, and he drew on the principles of Ubuntu as a reconciliatory approach to those apartheid era crimes. This commission was a court-like body that was assembled, and anybody who felt they've been wronged or who felt they've been injured or the victim of violence during apartheid could come and plead their case before the commission and be heard. In addition, perpetrators were also given the opportunity to come before the commission and tell their side of the story. However, the agreement was that they had to tell the truth. And if they did, they could apply for amnesty. And then the commission would decide whether amnesty was granted or not. These hearings made international and national news. And as I said, the commission was a crucial component of the transition to a full and free democracy in South Africa. And despite some flaws and some criticism, it's generally believed to have been successful. And there are many other countries that have similar types of truth and reconciliation commissions. So notice that there's also the idea here with Ubuntu. Yes, it's the idea of like harmony and togetherness and connectedness, but there are also the ideals or the principles of forgiveness and justice, right? Or forgiveness and reconciliation rather than vengeance. So Ubuntu is also about justice, justice for all people. As much as we must look to each other and help each other, it's just as important that we exercise fairness and equality for all people, regardless of race, gender, or social status. So essentially, Ubuntu is about togetherness as well as a fight for the greater good. So notice the name of this commission. It's the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So it's that idea that we cannot heal from those wounds of the past unless we face the truth. And look at the definition of truth here. It's conformity to fact or reality, to a standard or ideal, steadfastness, a statement of belief that corresponds to reality. And then look at reconciliation. It's the act of restoring friendly relations after a dispute or conflict. So it's the idea here, it's the belief that you cannot have justice, you cannot have healing, you cannot have restoration unless you also have truth. The truth must be part of that process. Here's another quote from Nelson Mandela. He says, reconciliation does not mean forgetting or trying to bury the pain of conflict, but that reconciliation means working together to correct the legacy of past injustice. And many of you are probably familiar with the story of Nelson Mandela. He fought very hard during the anti-apartheid movement, and in fact, he was jailed for his activities to try to bring down the apartheid regime. He spent 27 years, the best years of his life, imprisoned in South Africa. And I was blessed to be able to visit South Africa. And when I was there, I went to Robben Island, the location of the prison where Mandela spent much of those 27 years. I saw the cell where he lived, the tiny cell, and I saw the rock quarry where he performed hard labor as part of his sentence every single day for most of those 27 years. When Nelson Mandela was finally freed in 1991, he said that as he walked out of the prison, he realized that he had to forgive. He had to be able to find forgiveness in his heart, or else he would still be imprisoned. And he continued that attitude as he moved forward. And 3 years later, in 1994, he was elected president of South Africa. Nelson Mandela also tells the story about one of the guards from the prison, a white South African, how they became friends and how they maintained that friendship even after Mandela got out of prison. So we see that Nelson Mandela, he embodied the spirit of ubuntu. He embodied the ideals of truth and of reconciliation, and he carried those ideas through as he became the president and tried to help the whole country heal from apartheid. That period following apartheid, with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, they also utilized a strategy known as restorative justice. So restorative justice is not the same as like our justice system, which is mainly based on punishment and vengeance, right, for the perpetrators. But look at the definition here of restorative justice. Restorative justice is a process where all stakeholders affected by an injustice have an opportunity to discuss how they've been affected by the injustice and to decide what should be done to repair the harm. Here's another description of restorative justice. This is from Carolyn Boyes Watson, who is the director of the Center for Restorative Justice at Suffolk University. She describes restorative justice. She says, restorative resolutions engage those who are harmed, wrongdoers, and their affected communities in search of solutions that promote repair, reconciliation, and the rebuilding of relationships. Restorative justice seeks to build partnerships to reestablish mutual responsibility for constructive responses to wrongdoing within our communities. Restorative approaches seek a balanced approach to the needs of the victim, wrongdoer, and community through processes that preserve the safety and dignity of all. So you can see there the principles upon which restorative justice is built. And I have them here on this slide as well. You see the main pillars of restorative justice: respect, accountability, healing, empathy. So restorative justice, it's a system that brings to all the parties together, the perpetrators and the victims. The victims get to tell their side of the story while the perpetrators listen. The perpetrators also get to tell their side of the story, but it requires them telling the truth. It requires them being accountable or taking responsibility for the wrong that they've done and for the harm that they have caused to the victims. The perpetrators have to listen to the victim's side of the story, and they have to deal with the impact that what they did had on those people. Then together, the perpetrators, the victims, and the community together decide what needs to be done to address the problem and what needs to be done for restitution, reconciliation, restoration. So notice that the point here with restorative justice is the rebuilding of relationships. The goal here with restorative justice is the rebuilding of relationships. And I believe that we can take these same principles and apply them to building a sense of community in these challenging times. This slide shows some of the main values of restorative justice, and you see them there on the slide. And I believe, again, that if we embody the spirit of ubuntu, right, the spirit of truth and reconciliation, of restorative justice, that we could solve these challenging problems that we're facing today in 2020. Yes, I'm just optimistic enough to believe that if everybody really embodied Ubuntu, this idea of collective responsibility, that we are responsible for the care and the well-being of everyone in the community, that we could solve the pandemic, that we could get rid of racism at all of its levels, that we could heal the political divides that are separating us, that we could deal with the issue of women's ordination, that if we embodied these principles, that we could, as a church, get back to our original mission and do it, including women as full, equal partners in every way to men. So I do believe that we can embody the spirit of Ubuntu and build a sense of community in these challenging times. Now, some of you might be saying, well, where's Christianity in all of this? I hope you recognize that all of these principles, all those values that you saw on the previous screen, are the same as the values we embody as Christians. There wasn't anything in this concept of Ubuntu, all of those values, all those principles we just went over, that is in conflict with Christianity. No, it's the opposite. They go together. And I could quote you the Bible verses. All of you know the verses that I could have quoted to show those principles in the Bible, right? You shall know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Love your neighbor as yourself, right? We could all quote those verses together, but I've selected one for this slide here, one that I think embodies this idea of Ubuntu. And it's 2 Corinthians 13:11. It says, finally, brothers and sisters, rejoice, strive for full restoration, encourage one another, be of one mind, live in peace, and the God of love and peace will be with you. So if we call ourselves Christians, if we say we're followers of Christ, we have to do what Christ told us to do. He gave us instructions. He said, love one another as I've loved you. He said, go and do likewise. Do what you have seen me do. And what did Christ do? He lifted up humanity. He went around healing people's wounds, listening, addressing their deepest hurts, and bringing people together. We can do the same thing. So that's my challenge to you today. How will you embody the spirit of Ubuntu? What are you going to do to spread this idea of collective responsibility, that we are responsible for each other? We are responsible for the well-being of society. So what will you do to spread the spirit of Ubuntu? Thank you.
Well, ladies, it is so good to have you. It's so good to be together. And thank you so much to AAW for putting this and creating this moment. This is exciting, and especially in the midst of all that's going on, for us to gather as women in different parts of the world and be able to enter into a good, healthy conversation. So thank you. Panelists, I would love to introduce each of you, but I'm going to I think I'm going to pivot over to you, and I'm going to ask you a fun question as you introduce your role, okay? This is a leadership conference, and oftentimes when I work with young adults, they all think, oh, leadership, this is like there's a goal and I write everything down and you become this because you wrote all this down, right? This is what you had envisioned for your life. So my question as you introduce yourself and the work that you do is going to be, was this your childhood dream that you had written on a piece of paper and you knew exactly that this was going to be the way that you were going to lead other women? So let me know a little bit about you, the work you do, and was this like your goal? This is exactly what I knew I was going to do. And Reverend, we're going to start with you because, the whole goal needs to begin.
Absolutely. Well, I'm excited, first of all, to be here. Thank the Lord, and thank you for that question. And that's a something. But to answer your question, no, I didn't think that I would be doing social justice. I was chosen to be a dancer. I was in the arts. I graduated from Loyola Marymount University in dance and theater and performing arts. But as social justice would have it, I was teaching in the inner cities. And through me teaching in the inner cities, I kept seeing injustices. So there you have it. I started, I couldn't even teach the kids for free because of the injustices. So that was unacceptable to me. And I got more involved.
And so that led you to what you're doing now. Tell us what you're doing now.
Well, I have multiple hats. So, but I'm working with the San Bernardino County Public Health and Nutrition. I am doing health and wellness. I'm an associate minister with New Hope Missionary Baptist Church. So I'm over the youth and I'm in the performing arts ministry at the church. And that those are the main key things that I'm doing. And of course, the chair of the African American Police Advisory. That's what I am the chair of, and our thanks to Chief Eric McBride for allowing this program to be in existence. Yes, so I end up being the choreographer for the Verizon Gospel for Rubidoux, Seventh-day Adventist. So I've always been interacting with Rubidoux, yes, and always there as a sister. So I just wanted to bridge that on how we interact.
So we've got nutrition and wellness. So you've got a whole realm of influence there. You've got church ministry. So you've got a whole area of influence there. And then you've got the chair working with the police department in a moment like this. So we're going to okay, I'm going to pause there. I'm going to go over to Melody, but
okay.
That's a lot.
And I stopped. Don't think, I want everybody to know I have many more hats. However, I will pause right there.
Let's just tackle 3 of your hats.
Yes.
Okay. Melody, all the way from Australia.
Hi, I was just thinking about what Reverend Veronica said. As women, we are multitaskers, aren't we?
Yes, we are.
But it's funny because when you ask about leadership, right?
Yes.
Up till now, I'm still going, who's the leader here? Are we talking about me? I don't consider myself a leader. I just consider myself a worker. And growing up, all I've ever wanted to be was to be a policewoman, actually. And I never ever thought that I was going to be a mother. What I'm doing now, I'm a project manager for a ministry that caters to moms. And we support moms. We have about a digital community of about 9,000 women. But beyond that, we have a TV show, we have a website, and we have social media as well. And all of that comes together to look after all these moms who are isolated. People who have gone through the whole motherhood journey will know that at the very, very beginning, you are in this own little bubble with just yourself and your baby. And you just feel really cut off from the rest of the world. And that's what we try to do. We try to be that bridge, to be there for those moms. But as a leader, I'm still not sure if I am one.
Yes, you are.
Oh, you are.
Absolutely.
9,000 women.
We crown you this day if you didn't know.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's beautiful. We're going to come back to, I love that. And I love completely very simple. I just love the way you say mama. That's so pretty.
Yes.
I love it. Okay, we'll come back to you. Thank you. Charisse, our youngest panelist,
Yes.
an ex-student of mine, so I'm just like so giddy that I actually get to have her here. Charisse, tell us, did you, even in like thinking about college, thinking about careers, thinking about what you wanted to do, did you imagine this role that you now have?
No, not at all. Not at all, actually. I think when I was younger, I think obviously like you ask what you want to be, and I'm going to lawyer or doctor, and I graduated high school, and I was, I had it convinced in my head that I was going to be a nursing student. Did it for 1 year, did not like it. Went through a whole like trying to find my purpose and trying to find me phase, and I don't think that'll ever stop, because I think life is just it's just a learning process all around. But no, I did not know that this is what I was going to be doing right now. I am currently a psychology major and hoping to get a master's in industrial and organizational psychology to work with corporations and organizations and et cetera to help community building. But yeah, this is not at all what I thought I was going to do. And which is fine. I enjoy what I'm doing. I enjoy the people that I work around, and I think they're very uplifting. But I also think that social media has always been kind of like a weird niche for a lot of younger people. There's a lot of pros and cons to it, and I think we'll probably get into that a little later. But yeah, I'm the digital content manager for Crosswalk.
Okay, yeah, I was just going to say that, like, speak to us what your actual title is, because then we've got to, for those of us that are not digital natives like you, right? Then we've got to ask you, what is that? So
right.
Your title is?
Digital content manager. So I manage all the digital like the final edit digital content that comes out from Crosswalk, and I post them onto our platforms that we have, such as like Facebook, our website, our Instagram, our YouTube, platforms like that. That's what I manage, and when they go out. So I'm usually the last person to go see them and make sure that they're okay. Up to par.
What's Crosswalk?
Crosswalk is a Seventh-day Adventist church here in Redlands, based in Redlands, California, in the San Bernardino County. And it's been growing very, very fast. We currently have, I think, 7 campuses in different conferences. Currently, we have Northeast Atlanta, Chattanooga, which is our second biggest campus, and just recently we brought on Portland, Denver, Northeast Atlanta, and Clinton, Massachusetts this year. So
okay, I'm going to put pause.
Okay.
But I wanted for the audience who may not know you or know Crosswalk to understand that this isn't just like somebody in a little local church just trying to upload, but rather it's like nationwide. There are campuses everywhere, and you're having to manage all of that.
Right.
You, Charisse, who always dreamed of doing this work. This is super exciting. Okay, Reverend. So yes. I need to ask a question in regards to, and I think the audience would find this moment that we're living in such an incredible moment for you to be in leadership in and to have all of these conversation partners. Tell us about, how do you do this? How do you make these connections?
Before I go to answering that, I would like to uplift and remember some souls that were unjustly killed. And I want to say their names as we move forward to apply justice. So I'd like to mention Eric Gardner, John Crawford III, Michael Brown, Tamir Rice, Trayvon Martin, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and all the other souls that follow this particular list. May Lord Jesus receive them to himself. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Beautiful.
Amen. But as you stated, between the police and the African community. How do we create that connection? At the beginning, we started this social project, social action, was entitled Voices for Change. And Voices for Change allotted us to work in the community, to listen to individuals in the community, and to take photos of different issues that were happening in the community. And it was our job to work with the community to create those changes. For example, syringes, drug syringes on the streets or all the things, and we take pictures of that so that we know where we need things to be cleaned up and whatnot. That's where it began. However, today, our world has did a shift in the community with COVID-19 happening and it, creating this physical distancing. Now we have to, again, recreate our how we engage to the community as we are processing and assessing resources that are needed for our victims now of crime, families or youth, and the community at large. We have to do another whole assessment. That's basically the bottom line, on how we are addressing our victims. And then two, we're processing and developing a communication connection that will be a direct link to our churches and our nonprofit organizations. And this communication link, we hope, will help keep open dialogue between the police and to assure accountability and community responsibility. How would the community like to see us bridge our partnership and communication with the police right now during these times? Because it's all changed. How we, one, hear the voice of the community, two, how we keep people accountable in leadership positions, and three, how do we still stay united? You know, one of the things we want to say, pray, unite. And besides us praying and uniting, we have to still work together in order to make sure that we have positive change within ourselves and with our policies. So those are the things that we need to do. When people say, well, what can we do? Those are the things. Pray and unite, and making sure that we can work together for policies and our environment and our leaders to work on our behalf as much as possible.
Yeah, I love that. I love the idea of pray and unite, right? Because in that idea, you're calling in the big guns, you know? Prayer means for those of us that are people of faith,
yes,
that, you know, in humility, we're going to reach up to the,
yes,
you know, to the God who knows and understands,
yes,
right? And
absolutely.
I love that unite, because of course we're going to do this work and then reach out and
right.
like bring, right? Which is the work of us as humans, is to be connected with each other. I love it. I also want to affirm you on something. You're very, like when you started in the beginning talking about how this all started.
Yes.
You know, I think people often forget that every sort of missional, every sort of
Yes,
life-changing moment begins when we are attentive to what's in front of us and we enter in to try to find a resolution. And I love how this just began from looking at your community and saying, let's do this better.
Yes.
Right?
Absolutely.
How has this moment of us being in isolation changed the conversations and the relationships? While, I mean, it's not just us being in isolation, but it's also
right.
gotten much more polarized. So how have you stepped in that particular moment?
You know, as one of the things I had jotted down, I said, unfortunately, with this forced society's change, there are groups and families and policymakers that are reacting in social ways that is different to us today. I mean, we've never seen this before. We've never seen this type of social crippling. I would say, I want to say crippling. I don't, you know, unjust, but it's just so disconnected. There, when society is not recognizing people as human beings, you know, just because of your skin tone, you're not human. That's kind of where we're walking in, you know, as some of those lives that I kind of like mentioned. I mean, I look at George Floyd. A lot of our community right now is looking and saying as that's a modern day lynching, you know, of a modern day murder right in broad daylight. We're not used to having justice or seeing justice do an unjust action so broadly like that today. But that's unfortunately what our children are seeing, and and which is really sad. I mean, we're seeing it. So the question is, what can we do about it? And that's why as I pre-references, one is not just pray and unite, but we have to hold individuals accountable. Yeah. And, you know, and they said, well, what does that look like? Well, we have to make sure that when injustice or killings or things are seen that are unjust, that we follow it through, that justice takes place, that is taken care of. Because if we don't, then it will continue. And we have to, as children of God, we have to make sure that we stand, because if we don't stand, we'll fall for everything.
Yeah. Beautiful, beautiful. I'll have to press pause to go to the next, but I don't want to. I just want to affirm you on a really subtle and beautiful way in which you began our time together by mentioning and by speaking the names. And it was beautiful. It is a way of also holding us accountable to the lives that are not just present,
Amen.
The lives that have left us and still want a voice. So I thought it was beautiful. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Melody, Mom.
9,000.
9,000. I wrote this question. I want to make sure that I'm reading it correctly. You have a digital group of 9,000 moms across 2 countries.
Yep, and, Australia, New Zealand.
So how has COVID now impacted this community that already is impacted, but now everybody's locked down and moms are at the center?
It's quite funny, actually, because as much as it sounds weird, and I don't really want to say it, COVID actually helped us because everyone's locked down, so everyone's turned online. And because everyone's gone online, going digital is actually normal. I'm just thinking about how when we have just this very Vespers that we're actually doing, would it have been possible to have someone from Australia attend if it weren't for COVID? And suddenly we're thinking outside the box and we're going, oh, let's just do a Zoom meetup. And because we're doing Zoom, we can get anyone from anywhere around the world.
Amen.
And so COVID actually helped us, grow our community. What has happened as well is that we did a lot of online activities. So we introduced online Zoom chats, we did online masterclasses, and these are anything from cooking demonstration to kids activities, experts talking about specific topics. So in that sense, it did us a great advantage, but yet at the same time, it did hinder our ability to meet in person. So it slowed things down a little because, you know, at the end of the day, as much as we say online digital community is great, nothing still beats that face-to-face personal touch.
Yeah, that's right.
We were actually just about to launch an events calendar for our moms to see where things were happening near them so that they could turn up, whether it be a church-run play group or family-friendly kind of event. That project, of course, went on hold. And so we just basically focused on running online activities. We're lucky now because restrictions are starting to ease up in certain places. And we've started launching local groups in specific towns, specific cities. And this way, the volunteers in that areas, they can actually organize events and meetups. But yeah, it's always with an eye on what's happening COVID-wise, because suddenly you might need to shut it all down again.
Yeah.
So then, and I love your lens of like COVID has opened up, because we know that those of us that are in leadership recognize that every moment has an opportunity, right? We talk about it in education. We say a crisis becomes, there's an opportunity there. So just, be mindful of it so that you don't like get torn down by the crisis, right? And so I love how you said now it's created this other reality and this other connection, though we know it's not the same. So I think it's never the in-person. I mean, I miss my students. They know it's just terrible. But I want to ask you in regards, for those that don't know, so you said creating gatherings. So the gatherings in persons, like what was the curriculum, or what were the things that you would do? And now the gatherings in Zoom, what are the things that you do? Is it conversational? Is it people just sort of uniting and sharing what's going on in their lives? What does that look like?
That is actually the main thing, that what we do is we want to create that friendship. We want to create that support. And so it really is so it depends on, like, if it's a gathering, it really is just a matter of just having moms chat around. We've got a lot of church volunteers who are part of that as well. And so it's trying to give them that hope, because as moms, I find that I wasn't always a Christian, and I find that having converted to Christianity, it's given me that kind of underlying hope that I would not have had. And that supported me through being a mother as well. And I like to be able to give that kind of hope of that worry that you have, whether you're doing the right thing. Because, when you give birth to a child, the other thing that you start developing is mom guilt as well. And so that's the two things that come hand in hand. And we want to be able to give moms that alleviating of that guilt, that worry that they have, that guilt that they have, and to know that, at the end of the day, Jesus is there to support you and to guide you and to give you the strength and wisdom.
I love that. I love that. I love that. First, you make them seen, that we see you. I sense that in the gathering, right, as a mom who's always giving, and then you also give them hope. I love that. You talked about Christian, and I think one of the things that I had read is that a good portion of your moms that join you are not Christian.
No, they're not. We've been really blessed in the fact that they see value in the community that we've created, and they just want to be a part of it.
Amen.
And so when you enter into these conversations, and when you've created this sort of safe place for them to be moms, whether Christian or not, do they ask you about your like, why are your hope, your faith, or is it created a whole other set of conversations?
It has, yes, but not as fast as we would think. You think, you have a conversation with someone and the next week they're asking you why you're a Christian, and it doesn't happen that quickly. It's really about ministering to them and being where they are right now. And so sometimes they don't ask, but yet at the same time, because we've created that rapport, they are actually open to listening to our perspective. So it really is a matter of finding the right timing to share your perspective, but knowing at the same time that your main goal is to be supportive of them, not to evangelize to them.
That's right. That's right. Preach it. It's about this relationship that you're building with them, right? And it's about, I often say, the relationship that they see of you and Jesus. And so the more they have a relationship with you, the more they see the relationship that's, with him. And so then, but that takes time and love, right? It isn't
and I think one of the things that we really need to be careful of is in the way we communicate, because we don't realize it, but we end up having our own jargon and our own lingo, and no one understands what pathfinders, adventurers, dedication, what does it all mean? And so if we do say it, we actually need to take time to explain what it actually means.
Yes.
And it's actually quite funny, because just this morning, one of the it's not really a small little crop fire that happened in our group. Is one of our group members was asking about Santa Claus, and it's almost Christmas now, so people are talking about Santa Clauses and stuff. And one of our members actually went, well, let's not talk about Santa Claus because it's an idol and it's a lie.
Oh no.
Which is true.
Yes,
I'm not
it's
denying
true.
that it's true.
Absolutely.
But when you haven't developed that rapport and you tell someone that what you are saying is a lie, it doesn't go down very well.
The tooth fairy and all of these things, we know it's imaginary and different things, but it's not what you say, it's how you say it. I'm sorry, I'm just in your amen corner on that.
Yes,
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Therese, I'm going to go with you because I think you're running out of time, and I want to talk a little bit about this work that you do. I know in talking with you, there's a whole bunch of platforms, and I didn't even know. So you're the digital native. Like, I am just grateful to Jesus for Zoom and text and email, right? But in talking with you, that was an interesting thing for me to understand how this social media now is done. It's not like, hey, here's a camera, let me video you and go, right? Like there's lots that's happening behind the scenes.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot. And half the time I'm not really part of it. I just I see the final product of it. But I can tell you this, there's a lot of work and a lot of time and energy that goes into the products that we put out. Initially, I think the organization that I work for, Crosswalk, has always been blessed in the ways of technology advancement, specifically in the Adventist world. I think a lot of the times in the Adventist organization, we're a lot more traditional, smaller churches, it's really just a simple camera and a stand or just a microphone. Here it's a little, we've definitely, I think one of the things that we've learned is really investing in our people, our volunteers, and investing in correct production equipment. And a lot of people, they kind of not shy away from it, but they kind of just, knock it to the side. But like, what really is what do you actually need? And what is the actual secret? That's really just it. Invest in your people, invest in your volunteers, and invest in equipment, because that's really what it is. Platform-wise, Facebook has always been around. Instagram has been around for a little bit.
For a little bit.
For a little bit. Not that long.
Oh,
long enough.
It's still there.
It's still there. It is still there. But in my eyes, Instagram's kind of, Facebook owns Instagram now, so it's kind of morphing into Facebook as well. But it's, social media is so great. Like, I think we all use it to some extent, and social media can be something like LinkedIn, a news source. It comes in different forms, but it's really a matter of using it correctly. And for churches, we use it as a way to connect with people. If it weren't for social media, we wouldn't be able to connect with the groups that we have currently, like Clinton and our other campuses, to display what's going on in our organization. But COVID is definitely, it's put a damper on a lot of things, but in a lot of ways, we've been able to grow during this season and really max out our capacity for what we can do. I don't think any of the pastors, any of the staff here, no one was asked to do the work that we're doing: editing, filming, buying LED lights. Like, who knew that we really needed to do that in ministry? That's really what we need, is the Bible at the end of the day, what people, right? But no one was asked to put themselves in front of a screen. And I think as a kudos to staff, a kudos to everybody that has to do this, teachers, execs, people, it's a new reality, but everybody's learning. I think everybody's on the same page in terms of that. It's a new reality.
I want to affirm the wisdom of your words, okay? Because you began with you've got to affirm people. And I think I've heard that in every single one of our panelists today. You know, in different ways, it's about affirming the people that you serve.
Yes.
Right? And it's about equipping the people. It's about giving and developing them. So I want to just recognize the wisdom of your words. And I thought, for somebody who's not a digital, the other interesting part that you said that I think I knew, but I don't think I understood, was you said media is great, right? But then you went on to describe it's because it's a connector. So social media, when it's being used to connect, right? And
Right.
so your task is to make sure that as many different people are connected, right,
Yeah.
to the work that the church is doing, because then the word of God is being spread, connected
Right.
to a lot. Am I understanding that correctly?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's really the way we use it, at least, like, is to connect with people who are, 1,000 miles away, and sometimes even closer. But again, like, the harsh reality of some of this stuff about COVID, like about being behind a screen and for doing it for so long, is that it gets really stale. Just a couple of weekends ago, we were able to have our first in-person event that Yami actually was able to help us with. I was in charge of registration, and she was helping
I
us
was
out.
working for her, just like
It was great. It was so great to have you there. And it was our first in-person meeting for a while, and we put a lot of thought into, well, what is this going to look like? How safe is this going to be? Can we make it safer than what the county and what the conference is asking us to do? And I think we did those things. But you realize after meeting in person after so long is that, like, media gets so stale. Like, the screen gets extremely stale, and you lose a part of humanity through it, So being able to, I wasn't even attending the service because I was putting some stuff away with my supervisor, but she just hearing people sing, like just a crowd of people sing, even though they were socially distanced, like that does something to you, as a cry. But there's
literally
nothing.
I want,
Hallelujah.
I want to connect what you're saying to people that work or are part of their local churches, and I want to connect it in this way. When I went there to go work for Therese and her crew, you need to know that Therese and her crew and the people that are there are about her age group. Like, it's about empowering the people. This is natural. It's about creating. I think we often think, like, what do I have to learn? And I've got to get in there, and I've got to figure out LinkedIn, and I've got to figure out. And I think one of the things, Therese, that you've said at the beginning and that I witnessed there is, man, so much of this is already naturally part of a generation, right? So empower them, serve them, and let them use this means to be the connectors. Which is kind of what Melody's doing with all the moms, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
It's actually giving, as you serve, you give it back to the individuals, and that is how it's working out. Right?
Yeah.
And that is leadership, right? That's the beauty of leadership that I think we as women are redefining and re-understanding, and I think creating new language for, is that, and I say this because I see it most present in women, is that it is about serving and being attentive to the needs of others. And thus, when you're doing that, none of us thought we would be in this position, but we're not limited to our limited imagination, right? This is where God steps in and says, man, when you serve and when you empower, like, this just goes all over the place. Let my imagination step in, right, and create this new normal. And I've sensed that, and I've heard that. I'll let you reflect on that, and each of you just kind of end with a sentence about what you've heard from each other and what you will take away from this moment, because that way we all did it together, and we all kind of thought and spoke together on this conversation. So, Reverend, you're on.
Okay. Well, definitely, I heard definitely having compassion for one another, listening to one another, loving one another, and how important our human connection, as Teresa was saying, our human connection is no matter what.
Can't be replaced.
That is our true love for one another, to encourage one another. So even in this new norm, we still have to figure out how we can still stay physically connected, but physically distanced. But and to enhance the technology. As one thing I loved also, that using technology and seeing technology as a help, as a help to the ministry. As my sisters in Australia, I'm so thankful that I get a chance to be able to connect with all of you where you are. That's the positive. That's the positive. But so that's one thing that I learned. And then I wanted to, again, since this is my ending, I wanted to say that two things that we want to help the community help us with is police accountability. I just would like to say that. Reinforcing and eliminating racial profiling. That's for everyone. Cease from provoking incidents to escalate to arrest or to deaths. That's very important. And the third one is to keep those body cams on. That's what we're asking our police department. And then for our community, we have an ask. We want our community abide by the laws. Abide by the laws. Making sure you have your insurance and your registration easily accessed, that you don't have to scramble and fumble through your glove compartment, easy access. And then third, apply patience and self-control when being approached by law enforcement or anyone. The fruits of the Spirit. Apply the fruits of the Spirit, because that's the keys of heaven.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Amen.
Melody?
It's funny, while Reverend Bronica was talking about her bit, one thing that really struck with me that just kept coming to my head that I'll end with is a quote that I'll paraphrase, but it's along the lines of never doubt that one person can change the world.
Hallelujah.
Yeah.
Yes, Lord.
Yeah. Beautiful. And concise. Thank you. Therese, what have you heard and last words for you for those that are wanting to become much more savvy in connecting and in social media and in knowing what to do?
Before I answer that, I think I kind of want to point out some things that I've heard from Reverend Bronica and Melody. When Melody was actually talking about supporting our moms, supporting our women, I think what really stood out to me is evangelism versus supporting. You know, how much more evangelism needs to be done versus supporting, and which one of the two is going to get the most work done, you know, in the most ethical way, in the most authentic way. I think that's what stood out to me a lot more with Reverend Bronica talking about our social justice issues that are extremely heavy right now, keeping our community accountable, eliminating racial profiling, all those things. Like it's a heavy world we're living in right now, and I think it never hurts to reiterate those things to our community. But for those who want a little bit more advice on being technologically savvy, is that it's okay if you feel like you're not doing okay. I think I mean, I can promise you this, that like I have to second guess a lot of the things that I put out, because I have to remind myself that thousands of people are looking at what, you know, I'm posting or somebody else is posting, and that sometimes that has an impact on a lot of people. But I guess the pressure that you put on yourself, you need to alleviate that in some way. The tech world can be very mean. And I guess to remind yourself that you're doing the best that you can, especially now.
Amen.
Is what I would say.
Ladies, thank you. This time feels so short. It feels like we just got started. So Thank you. Thank you, sisters. I love that phrase, Reverend. I'm stealing it. It's mine.
That's okay. That's
Borrowing
okay.
it.
I share it freely.
Thank you. I love it. Thank you, sisters, sisters of the kingdom, sisters called in the places that God has called you. Thank you for responding, for being available, right? For being available and allowing God to use you in the ways that He is currently using you. And blessings be yours. Blessings be yours. Go with hope, go with courage, for the work that you are doing is His, and the battle has already been won. So enter it with His presence. And thank you. Honored to have met each of you. Honored for this chance to connect. And to our audience, those of you that are listening, each one of you is a leader in your space. And may this moment have brought to you sort of an affirmation for the calling that is yours and yours alone. And blessings.
Amen.
I think ubuntu should definitely join my vocabulary. I am because of my community. At the Association of Adventist Women, we are because of you, our community. As we finish this last Vespers in our series, we'd like to invite you to join our conversation at Facebook or on our website at www.associationofadventistwomen.com. As I reflect on our Vespers, I hope that you're feeling more confident about your purpose in life, that you feel that you are a leader because you influence others, and that you take the time to nurture yourself so that you can nurture others better. I've been inspired by the creativity of our women pastors, and I look forward to seeing how this pandemic changes the face of women in ministry. I also love the idea that if we want to really be like Jesus, we have to serve. And that means that we need to recognize the people who serve in our community as the most Christ-like. I also look forward to creating more health and community around me. Let's bow our heads. Dear God, thank you so much for creating us as communal beings, those who can influence others. Please bless us, let us feel your love so that we always have something to share with others to create stronger communities. Amen.